and you didn't mean it this way, but I'm going to answer it this way. The challenge with the map merger question is it starts to feel like we're talking about business acquisitions, and I don't mean that. I'm talking about capacity, where a mat of 2 or 3 schools with no other schools around it able to join almost has to merge in order to build the capacity to improve the schools they've already got before they take on any more. So for me, it's not a negative, it's a positive. The challenge, of course, is that the only mats that we've merged up until fairly recently have been when it's gone wrong. And so people associate that with the strategy that I put in place to deal with it. But I think it can be better than that. And in the answer to Pat and I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first name. Denise, your question is. So it is the question for me, because capacity givers and capacity takers, which I really think is the right way to think about this. The reason why capacity givers may not give of their capacity is because they're worried that in doing so, they weaken their own school. And that weakness is predicated on what's going to happen to my results, what's going to happen to my Ofsted judgment. So we've got an example there, the accountability system driving the behaviour that prevents it. The capacity taker bit, I think, is equally challenging in that. In order to be a capacity taker, you have to address the mindset issue that I'm going to have to expose my weak practice. And that's difficult. That's a really difficult thing to do. And so therefore the school and the organisation and the leaders have got to be in a position where they are willing to be helped. And one of the reasons why sometimes you see 10, 15 providers going in to help this one poor school is actually because the school thinks it dilutes the impact of any one person working out what the problem is. And I say that semi-jokingly, but semi-seriously as well. Whereas when I've seen really effective, this Teaching School Alliance helping this school, where the trust is built between the leaders, where the plan is the right plan, where it's not trying to solve 50 problems, but 1 or 2, that's when I see it working. So there is a mindset shift around how the accountability drives that behaviour, and also how it feels to be on the receiving end. And I think my final point is, if I can build a language around you move from being a capacity taker to a capacity giver, then actually that's quite motivating, because I need help today, but in 2 or 3 years' time, I won't need that help and I can offer it back. And that's part of the journey, I think.
And building the expectations. Steve,
Can I add to
you come in on that because, you started the notion of capacity giving when you introduced NLEs. Actually,
yeah, I want to talk about that really, because although I've said that I think the Ofsted outstanding was the wrong criteria to use for NLEs, when we initially developed the notion of NLEs, the only model before that was you've got a school that's in serious trouble, you either have to close it down and reopen it, or you have to find a head who's willing to leave their school, go into that school, and risk potential career suicide if it goes wrong. That was the only model. At least with NLE work, you're still the head of your own school. You've still got that credibility. You're not saying goodbye to all that and going to help another school and ending up in trouble. If you're still the head of your own successful school, it's much less of a risk to then help another school. You'll still get a bit of bad publicity if the school you're helping doesn't do well, but it's not as bad as losing it all. And that was part of the mentality at the time. Second point to say is, for years, it doesn't happen now, but for years, when I was at the National College, we analysed every year the performance of the schools that were supporting other schools, and the performance of the schools that were getting support, and the performance of schools that weren't doing either. And every year, the schools receiving the support improved rapidly. Not in every case, but the vast majority were improving rapidly as a result of help. And every year, the schools providing the help carried on improving. There were some that didn't, but overall they did. So this was a win-win for the system. And when we talked to the people about it, they said, it's professional development. We see things we didn't see before. It's good for our staff. There's lots of positives. So it is a win-win for the system. That doesn't mean to say in every case it works. Sometimes you should be focusing on your own school and not helping others. But the idea is that it is win-win. And the last thing I want to say is, I'm working with a lot of systems around the world now. It's a great privilege, actually. And one of the things that we're exploring in terms of accountability, really interesting, some even high-performing systems are looking at, first of all, not just relying on standardized testing for how you judge schools, but and developing a balanced report card which includes other things. And that's happening in places like Ontario, which is a high-performing system. But also developing collective accountability systems rather than individual school accountability systems. So that you then reward collaboration rather than reward competition.
Yeah.
And David's nodding quite strongly to that as an idea. Anybody else want to come in, ask a question or make a comment on what we've said? Yeah.
Tom Franks to Greenwood. You've talked about the moral purpose. I think there's a lot of people with this moral purpose, and that's what we've got here. I suppose the accountability measures, and I suppose a bit of a question for David, how is the link up between Ofsted and your department? We hear and we see loads going on in the press and Twitter and all of these areas, but I suppose that is one of the issues that you always have with takers and viewers, is that big accountability.
Yeah.
I just wondered where.
Yeah, and related to that really is there anything, David, that you are doing and can do to protect the architects? The people who, are going to take time, as well as protecting those who are the ones who put their neck on the line working in the most difficult and challenging circumstances.
So yours is a great question, but yours is different. But I'll try to put them together if I can. So I'll come to yours first because I think yours is a good one. So I think one of the real challenges is how we define and make really clear the different contributions, if that's the right word, that Ofsted and RSEs make. And Amanda Spielman and I have been working hard over the last 6 months on the development of a protocol that we want to sell the system about. But the fact it's taken 6 months tells you it's not easy to do it. I try to view things quite simply if I can, and then make it more complicated later rather than the other way around. But the way I think we look at it is the role of Ofsted is to diagnose that moment in time, that 2 days or whatever it is, that was the script of what we saw on that point. Our job is to then look at the treatment that follows from the diagnosis. And that our job is not to rejudge the school, not to even challenge whether the decision is right or wrong, but to work out what the school needs to do next. And it's partly, again, one of the things about why I feel so passionate about what I've said to you this evening is that the answer to that question will be so multi-layered. What does that school need next? It's a huge question. But if we take it as a binary decision, good school, bad school, and we don't get beyond that, we'll just superficially help these schools. That's the first one. What was your bit?
Oh, my bit was, Ofsted goes in and says, what's the progress in 12 months or the 18 months, whatever.
The architect's question.
And the architects, protecting the architects.
Well, I worked, talked to Ben about that when he was developing it, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think I was an architect. I think that was how I worked. I think there were times when I was running several schools in the MAP where I was probably leaning more towards the surgeon end of it because I probably needed to keep the pace up. But fundamentally, my instinct is to get the systems and develop the people to get the outcome. And I think my answer to your question is what I can do to help is I mentioned it when I spoke, which is we need to move away from this feeding frenzy around August results and everybody panicking in September about, okay, right, this school was doing really well in June. That hasn't changed because the results are where they are. And how do we build a conversation about what progress looks like as we're going through that journey, so that you look at an academy that was below floor last year, it's still below floor this year, but it will be a much better school because the right things are being put in place. But if they're not being the right things put in place and there's an inertia around it, that's a different conversation. But my worry is that in the quest to move the whole system forward, we lose really good people. The phrase that I get thrown at me quite a lot, Martin George in Times Out, he loves this one. He talks about the football manager syndrome in leadership. It's not true. It's just not true, because if Jose Mourinho gets sacked at Chelsea, he gets a job at Man United. If we lose our jobs in the system, we don't get picked up to go and work for somebody else. So the risk of losing good people from headship, where the error was it was the wrong match of a person to school, as opposed to you can't be ahead, that's the bit that I want to influence.
I think this is really important, and it needs voices like David's to be saying this, because it's not just this particular government. It's been going on for some time. There's an idea that it's all macho and you've got to get your results, and if you don't, you're in trouble. And it pervades the system, and governing bodies listen to it and they think they have to take action, etc., etc. Now, of course, we understand that some cases schools are failing badly and letting their children down, and drastic action needs to be taken. But the sense of perspective, that it's more than just a 1 year's fix, that has to be a message that David is saying. Others need to say it too, I think.
All I would say is, if the manager of Cardiff City was bottom of the league now, I'd expect him to be sacked.
Oh, we're degenerating into football talk now. I'm going to call it to an end now. I think we've had an immensely rich contribution this afternoon from our two speakers. We're really privileged to have both of them here. And I said to you how influential they both are. I'm sure we're going to hear more from David on those 8 categories, that much more nuanced way of thinking about schools and thinking about the questions you ask about schools and the actions you might take depending on where you are. And it picks up on Michael Watkins, the Harvard man stuff, actually. And it will be very, very important. We've also had, I think, a really encouraging kind of congruence between David and Steve, both giving very strong messages about ethical leadership in these times. We need you both to keep reinforcing that message, and we need you both, we need you, David, very much to help to build a system which has that ethical outlook running through it, is not seduced by those quick fix surgeons who go off and get themselves knighthoods and damehoods and so on, no disrespect, but the quick fix surgeons, but is...
I'm going to give it back now.
But does understand the importance